Welcome. In some denominations, you'd make a trip to the pastor's study for answers to the really tough questions. Well, let's see what we can do here. Merry meet, blessed be. Get around here. Welcome to another session in a very different pastor's study. Depending on how you got here, I'm Aiden Odinson, High Priest of the Temple of Gaia, or Bishop Cal Lippitt of the Universal Episcopal Church. And I've noticed some things going on lately. And I look and I see, hey, over here this is kind of the same thing. And so much of it is basically people claiming to be what they're not. And what would I have to say is first and foremost, religious people following a particular path and claiming that they are following the path that was forged oh so many years ago. Now, I'll have to grant, there are some who say, with wisdom, that they aren't quite conservative and Reform Judaism, for instance. Admit that they're not quite the same as what you would find in King David's time, for instance. But they admit it. And they also admit to where they take variance from the original path. I have noticed among some people who call themselves Christians, there sometimes seems to be a real effort to avoid the teachings of that guy that some people sometimes refer to as Christ. I don't think he taught that much hate. Yes, I know that there's a lot of hate in the Old Testament, but I wonder how much of that hate was added in. True, they were trying to reclaim their land, the land that was granted to Abraham. And yes, that can make people rather hyper about making sure that they get what they say is theirs. We've seen this a few hundreds of times since in history, so why not? But if you take a look at the New Testament, you see something entirely different. Now, of course, people have broken off into various bodies, and various bodies don't act like one another. It's true that if you go into a Presbyterian church service or a Methodist church service, you might find pretty much the same thing. But it won't be necessarily the same thing that you'll find in a Southern Baptist church service. And it certainly won't be what you find with the Universal Episcopal Church or the Roman Catholic Church. No. But we're talking about people claiming to be what they're not. And that is followers of the original teaching. And sometimes, well, the deeper and deeper I get into this, finding out You know, this business about love your neighbor as you love yourself, etc. I think about some other incidents that I know about. One happened recently at the Philadelphia airport. Somebody whose mother worked for Air France, he made a copy of her ID badge and then altered it to fit him and to give himself the title of pilot. Well, he didn't plan on actually flying an airplane, but what he did think would be that that would get him some preferential treatment. And so he got onto an airplane and he showed his badge, and I guess he had something that passed for a uniform, and next thing you know, he was offered to sit in one of the jump seats up in the cockpit. A fairly common courtesy. And so he did. And a few minutes later, somebody was quietly making a call to security before the plane even left that obviously the guy was not a pilot. Why would they know that he was not a pilot? Because there were other pilots in there with him, and they probably knew what kind of planes Air France flew. They probably knew where some of the places where they'd seen Air France planes land. You know, it would be like, and this was the comparison that a police officer used, it would be like if one of us went into the surgeon's lounge of a hospital and there were a bunch of surgeons there and they were talking shop. Would we be able to pass? No. And sometimes I talk about Monday morning quarterbacks. I used to tell people when I had a certain duty over the weekend that required a lot of disk space, I would say, clean up your disk space. Now, before the weekend, bear in mind, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I will not be too happy, and I will do what I see as necessary, and critics are volunteers. And right there was the thing. Critics are volunteers. Monday morning quarterbacks. They never suit up. They never go to practice. The TV camera's never on them. But you hear them on Monday morning on how they would do better and how they know more. And I would just love to see a coach come up to one of them and say, "Okay, come with me. I'm going to suit you up. I'm going to take you to practice. And next Sunday, you can show your expertise." Doesn't happen, and that's how Monday morning quarterbacks get away with it. On the other hand, we have situations such as, well, the problems with the Affordable Care Act website, and people making lots of comments on that. Having built a few websites and having worked well over 20 years in information technology, I can tell you that when you try to interface how many different companies together and how many variations they have in their plans and how many variations there are in describing them, even if you have a standard format, and then trying to figure out how many people are going to be logged on and how many people are going to be logged on to what part, you got a challenge. And it's a challenge that I'm not part of. However, you do have, just like Monday morning quarterbacks for football, You do have snack room systems analysts. Unfortunately, some of them wind up turning themselves into something called project managers. And that gets to be more fun than I want to talk about right now. And I'm glad I'm retired from that business. But picture a bunch of them with the same mistaken view, and they go charging forth. And there's enough of them. Now, I'm not talking just about how something compares with what Jesus wrote or said. How about what Crowley said? How about what Gardner said? Any of them. Unfortunately, things get really turned around after the original author dies. I hope Sylvia Ravenwolf writes a whole lot so we know exactly how she stands on everything, because I can think of one other group. It was once a very major group, and I was once privileged to be their guest. Unfortunately, after the main founder died, among other things, there were arguments over what he said about this, what he said about that, and people tried to deprecate his widow and the people who were trying to hold things together. No. And that's a thought for right now. I realize it's impossible to find out what exactly Moses had in mind. A lot of what Crowley did, I am presuming to be showmanship. Yes. And why not? He didn't have the internet or anything else, so he did what he needed to do to get attention so that somebody would pay attention to what he was trying to do. I've been tempted to try something like that in my own way. But here's something to mull over, because I'm mulling it over right now, and don't be surprised if you see something more on it on the Secrets in Plain Sight. That what is it? What isn't it? And these people who claim to be they are, but they're not really. And there are some that'll say, hey, we know we're not. We're trying to put this back together. Which is a large part of what Wicca is, after all. Trying to put it back together from what we've been able to find. On the other hand, there's others that just keep charging forth as if they had all the original stuff. Well, that's a challenge. And I'm going to leave you with that, because it's something we're going to be having to deal with every day until all these people like Odin and Cernunnos and all those others decide to put in an appearance and say, hey, hold it. This is what we had in mind. Until then, we got ourselves a project trying to figure this out. Merry part and merry meet again. Blessed be. This has been a presentation of the Wise Ones Net. Merry part and blessed be.